Alright, now we are going to move on our phylogenetic tree from Squalus up to Actinopterygii, which would be the bony fish. And in this case, the bony fish that we're dealing with is going to be Dasypodus, or Pomadasys. I said it backwards. Pomadasys. Pomadasys is the Mexican gray perch. This is the one that we typically use in these dissections. They're farm raised and such, so they're very plentiful that we can get them. The big change that we're seeing now as we go from Squalus to Pomadasys is we're going from a cartilaginous skeleton to a calcified, bony skeleton, hence the name bony fish, as we were talking about earlier. The axial skeleton looks very similar between Squalus and Pomadasys. There's only a few different exceptions that we see along the way. That cartilage seems to have been replaced with calcified bone, but for the most part, you still have that same centrum. You then have the neural arch, and a lot of it looks very similar. So if we bring in our fish here, all right, everybody can see this, hopefully. You can see that I have the skull region up here. All right, try to hold this a little higher. And then following behind the skull region, I have the trunk vertebrae running to the back. And then right around here, I have the pelvic girdle. And you can see that line running down this way. All right. That would be the pelvic girdle. We'll talk more about that when we talk about the appendicular skeleton. And then running posterior to this would be the caudal vertebrae. So we have two types of vertebrae just like we saw in Squalus. We have the trunk vertebrae and we have the caudal vertebrae. And we can tell those apart just like we did in Squalus, where once you get into the caudal vertebrae, as shown in the picture back here, you're going to have that hemal canal. Okay? One of the other big things that you're going to have in Dasypodus, of course, I said it backwards again, Pomadasys, is these points are becoming more elongated. And so we might refer to those now more as a process or a spine than we did before. So what I mean by that, it's a much more pronounced spine, and you'll see that on both ends. And this now would be representative of Pomadasys, my bony fish, okay, my perch. This would be my neural spine, and down below, on the ventral side, ventral to the hemal canal, is the hemal spine. And if we go back to my fish here, you can see those neural spines running along the top, the dorsal side, and you can see running below my hemal spines running ventral. All right. If we go back up here to the trunk region, this looks a little different. So in the trunk region, you have your centrum and a very well pronounced neural spine, but you're missing that hemal spine. Remember, you don't have that hemal canal there either. Here you have two types of ribs that are going to articulate with the vertebrae itself. You have a rib that's going to go towards the ventral side of the fish. This is your ventral ribs. And then you have a slender rib that goes more towards the dorsal side. And this is your dorsal rib. And so if I go back to my fish, here you can see the ribs running along the body cavity. And if I kind of turn this, you can see there's some ribs that are very small that are coming off closer to where the vertebrae are and running up. See those running along the lateral side of the vertebrae. Those would be the dorsal ribs. And those running ventral, the very elongated ones, those would be the ventral ribs. And running dorsal to all of this, all of these ribs, is the neural spine. Okay? One of the things you'll notice with the fish here is at the very top, it looks almost as if there's another vertebrae. That's not another vertebrae. Those are your radial pterygophores. Just like the shark had radial pterygophores at the base of each fin, here you have radial pterygophores that run down the entire length of the fish along the dorsal side. Similar to squalus, you have an anterior dorsal fin, you have a posterior dorsal fin, and you have a caudal fin. In addition, you will have another fin here supported by the axial skeleton, a fourth, and that's the anal fin. And obviously the anal fin is positioned right next to where the anus would be. You don't see a well-pronounced anal fin in many fish, but you do see it in the perch and other individuals in Percidae, including darters. This is a pretty well-pronounced anal fin. You also see a well-pronounced anal fin in trout as well. Trout and some other fish like that, and salmonoides, things like salmon, will have a fifth fin called an adipose fin that we don't have here. And I'm not going to hold you accountable since our perch don't have that. All right. If we looked at these fins, you would see in this most anterior dorsal fin, these are rays coming off of the radial pterygophores. And in particular, we call the ones that are part of the anterior dorsal fin, we call those spines. If you ever picked up a fish, a bass, a perch, whatever, those are the very sharp ones that you don't want to get poked by. They're used as defense, in addition to locomotion. These that are towards the back on the posterior dorsal fin and the anal fin, those are going to be your fin rays. They're softer and more bendable and pliable. And it's the same for if you go back here to the caudal fin, those would be rays as well. Notice the caudal fin looks very different from what we saw with squalus. In squalus, it was a heterocircle tail. It was asymmetrical. If we look at the perch, it's homocircle. Homo meaning the same, it is symmetrical. If we were to divide this in the dorsal region and the ventral region, they're mirror images of one another. As we get towards the back, the neural spines will start to taper off towards the back here on the caudal fin, and these are called uroneurals, and they're shown in green. The hemel spines running along the caudal vertebrae will taper off back here on the caudal fin, and those are referred to as hyponeurals. And they form support for the caudal fin. And that concludes our fish.